Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evan Bradley. I am the CFO here at Campbell Property Management, one of the partners of the company, and I am also a licensed CAM. I've helped some of our largest associations with their budgets over the last 15 years. And I can honestly say we're probably looking at one of the most difficult budget cycles we've had in our industry, certainly in the last 10 or 15 years coming up this year, which is why we wanted to get into this today. Keep in mind, every budget is unique. Some of you were looking for a simple prescription for what percentage increase should we use for this year's budget. And unfortunately, it's not going to be that easy this year. There's no single percentage number that you should use. You're going to have to go line by line through your own budget, look at each category, some categories more than others, which we'll get into. And some of those categories may not change. Some may go up 20, 30%. We're going to talk about all this in a little more detail today, but this is going to be a difficult budget cycle. So, Dan, do you want to take us through our agenda?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Tiernan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and one of the owners of Campbell. I'll be acting as the moderator for today's webinar. So after I do a super brief introduction to Campbell, Evan and I will discuss the following. Inflation trends. I think at one point we talked about this as the similar an analogy to this being like a hurricane. It is a very extreme situation we're in this year. Highest inflation in 40 years. You guys all know that, but it's important to go through all that. Then we'll talk about how inflation is going to be impacting different budget categories in your community associations. Then we'll cover some different concepts you need to take in your budgets for 2023. Which, as compared, like Evan said, to the last 10 years, we experienced 2 to 3% inflation per year versus the 9.1% we're seeing now. And then some action items that you should do now, and then hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A as well. So in case you don't know anything about Campbell, here's a super brief overview. We're local and focused exclusively in South Florida. We have 7 offices and service properties between Miami-Dade and Port St. Lucie. We have about 400 clients, and a third of those clients have been with us for 10 plus years. So we're very proud to be South Florida's highest rated property management company. And one of the key reasons for that is that we've been able to retain over 98% of our clients year to year on a year-to-year basis. So with that, let's move along and talk about inflation.
All right.
So Evan, what are we seeing for inflation in the market right now?
Yeah, so I posted some statistics here, Dan, from some recent news articles that I've been taking a look at, and what you really have to look at is not just national inflation, but South Florida inflation. The Department of Labor and Statistics does break it down by region, and our South Florida region was up 9.6% in April 2022 year over year versus, so that means over the past year from April 21 to April 22, 9.6% inflation. That is higher by about 1% than the national average right now. So what we're seeing down here is even a little worse than what the rest of the country is seeing. Rents up 57% year over year from a Realtor.com article I read. I think many of you in condos are very familiar with what's happening in the insurance market. With condo insurance rates going up anywhere from 30 to 100%. That's based on a lot of factors. Most of those actually don't have much to do with inflation. They have a lot more to do with the macroeconomic factors worldwide related to disasters and the reinsurance market. Private transportation costs, which is a fancy way mostly of saying gas, but also cars and car repair costs are up dramatically as well. That's way outpacing the standard core inflation. We're all familiar with gas prices. We see them every day as we drive down the road. And one that really impacts our local associations here is wage inflation. And wage growth in the South Florida market was actually highest in the nation at 6%. And 6%, you might say, oh, well, that's less than regular inflation. Well, maybe that's good news. It's not good news, unfortunately. That 6% number, keep in mind, is an average of, of inflation across all wage categories. And I can just tell you that white collar wage inflation has not been nearly as high as what I would call blue collar or, manual labor wage inflation. I think any of us that have maintenance staff, janitorial staff, security, front desk, we're all seeing those pay rates jump from the $12, $13 an hour range to the $15, $16 an hour range. And on a percentage basis, if you look at that, a $13 an hour employee who now makes 15, that's a 15.3% raise. And it's not just at your association. If you go by a Target, if you go by a Starbucks, a Panera, you're seeing signs advertising $15 an hour starting salaries. Some places $15 an hour starting, including tips. And those people work in the air conditioning. So have to keep in mind what we need to pay somebody who may need to work outside.
Right. So Evan, so a lot of increases over the last year. What are the trends like looking forward? Is inflation easing?
There are some early signs it may be easing slightly. If you read the recent articles about the housing market and certain commodity prices, certainly not gasoline. But nothing that I've read at least suggests it's going to ease significantly enough that we shouldn't anticipate inflation to continue through the end of this year and into next year as we work on our budgets. I did look up inflation statistics from the early 80s. That was the last time we experienced anything like this in this country. Certainly I wasn't doing budgets then, and I don't think you were either, Dan. And at that time, the inflation persisted almost 3 years at double-digit rates. I'm not saying that's going to happen this time, but if history is any precedent, it didn't shut down right away. So, and part of the reason for that, I think, is how it's now crept into everyday items. And I think there's a little chart here, Dan, that really shows what everyday people are going through related to inflation.
Yeah, no, this is a great point. I mean, when you actually look at the vast majority of the labor, like Evan said, that supports our condominium and HOA associations are kind of lower wage people, and they get hit absolutely hard by the grocery and the gas and the rent in particular. And here's just a quick analysis of July to July 21 to July 22 grocery price changes, on average 10.8% in our specific market, West Palm and Miami Beach. And what prompted me to suggest we do this is I know my own personal experience. I got sent to the grocery store last week, had to buy 18 eggs. That was the only thing I bought. It was $5.65. And I was just like blown away that it had gone up that much. And when you look through this chart and you see these items, I mean, I'm sure you guys are seeing the same thing, and it's impacting all the employees for all the vendors and all the staff that we have at all of our properties.
All right. So the properties don't buy eggs and they don't buy groceries. So what does this mean for the association budgets, I think, is what's next. So
yeah. So Evan, what categories of the budget are you seeing the most pressure?
Yeah, it's really, I kind of broke it down into three main categories here. It's your labor intensive businesses. Again, we talked already about that huge jump in hourly rates at the manual labor end of the market is way higher than the quoted 8 or 9%. And so any of those businesses, landscaping, security, access control, property management, anything where the bulk of the service being provided is provided by people, you're seeing a lot of inflation and wage inflation. The next category is insurance. Again, a totally different set of factors. We did actually do a whole webinar on this recently. And if any of you want to go to campbellevents.org, that's campbellevents.org, you can see all of our prior webinars, and myself and Paul Mack from Mack and Waltz Insurance discussed this at length recently, and and you can learn all about what all the different factors are in that market. But the bottom line is it's up 20 to 100%, and it's not just property, it's not just wind, it's also general liability, and even umbrellas and D&O policies are being affected there now. And the last item is your reserve items and or capital improvement projects. Anyone who's tried to put on a new roof, tried to repave a parking lot or streets in their community, or really try to do anything in that arena, those project costs have gone up much more than the standard core inflation as well. Those are labor intensive projects, often in the supplies needed for those projects. A lot of them are petroleum based, and a lot of them are in short supply due to the housing boom, supply chain issues from China, on and on. So those are the categories that we're really seeing huge issues. And unfortunately, those are often the biggest issues for any budget.
Right. And Evan, there were a lot of questions before the webinar, during the registration, and even now about the condo inspection bill and how that's going to impact reserves. We actually held a webinar on this as well. You can go to campbellevents.org and watch that. But a key thing to understand is that most of these provisions don't take place until 2024. So you need to be prepared for the fact that you're going to need, that you may not be able to waive reserves in the future. But again, that's not going to hit us for a couple of years.
Right. Just to get back into a couple of these categories for a second, we did talk about what it means to go from $12 or $13 to $15. That's a 19% increase. But beyond that, some vendors, you may have an access control vendor. You say, well, I'm under contract for 2 or 3 years, and I locked in my price in 2020 or maybe even early 2021. Don't be surprised if those vendors, if they have an out, are canceling those contracts. We are seeing vendors that have a 30-day cancellation clause exercise those because they genuinely cannot find labor at the price that was in that contract. And if you're not willing to work with them, they're certainly not going to lose money by sending someone to your association and paying them less than they're getting paid in return. And you got to, again, factor in all the additional costs of having an employee. It's not just the hourly rate, it's the taxes, it's the benefits, it's the overhead, et cetera. So we really are seeing that happen. And we do encourage you to work with your vendors. If they're asking you for increases to pass through to the staff, you're going to have high turnover. You're going to have inexperienced or unqualified people show up at your property. We've seen some instances where security literally just could not man the gate because they couldn't get anybody, or they couldn't get anybody for a price that made sense for the contract, and the gate was just left up for a shift. These are all things that are really happening. And then everyone says, well, that's terrible, they should just let that vendor go. They probably should, but if you let that vendor go, what are you going to be paying the next vendor for the same services? So you've got to keep these things in mind. This is a very unique time. And it's going to require unique solutions. Some of the old ways of doing business just don't work as well in this inflationary environment. Another major category is landscaping. And I think people tend to look at landscaping as a bit of a commodity. First of all, it's really not. Landscapers do have skills. Supervisors have skills. There is, important knowledge related to how to fertilize plants, how to trim plants, how to trim hedges, how to do things to prolong your plant life and eliminate weeds and other issues versus not. And when you cut corners with fertilizer, when you cut corners, with treatments for weeds and different things, which is what landscapers, may have to do to try to meet a certain contract number, you can really run into problems. Landscapers, they use blue collar labor, they use gas, they use trucks and equipment, and they use fertilizer. If your landscaper's coming to you and saying, hey, I need an increase, if you think about those 4 categories, they're all some of the hardest hit inflationary categories. They're probably not blowing smoke, and you need to take them seriously. Or the landscaper may just be forced to cut corners to, again, meet a price, and your property values can deteriorate based on that. So, again, keep that in mind. So I think the next topic is reserves.
Yeah. So Evan, I know that even if you've updated your reserve study, maybe you got an updated reserve study or new one done in January of this year or December of last year. Do you need to get an updated reserve study?
I think it's okay if it's in the last 6 months, because I do think inflation was fairly well understood in the last 6 months. But I'd say anything older than, anything from 2021 and older, certainly middle of 21 and older is probably not any good anymore. I've seen people pull out reserve studies from 18, 19, 20 and say, well, we'll use this, or we'll just bump it up a few percentage points. I mean, it's not a few percentage points. I mean, these categories are up 5, 10, 20, 30% in some cases. So you really have a duty to make sure that you're fully reserved. You really should be getting updates and looking at all these major items in your budget.
So, and also just, although this isn't the focus of the presentation today, what advice can you give on the condo inspection bill and its impact on reserves?
Yeah, again, we did do a full webinar on that. But in the very short answer, the bottom line is if nothing changes related to that bill, and the people I've talked to don't expect certainly this portion to change, there's not going to be an ability to waive reserves for what the state's calling structural items. And you can consider that your concrete restoration, your roof, painting and waterproofing is in there. Windows, if you're responsible for those, anything that is going to affect the fire systems, anything affecting the life safety of your building, you will not be able to waive reserves after 12/31/2024. So that means, as far as we can tell, the 2025 budget for your condo association, again, this is condos only at this time, will need to have full funding for all those life safety items. So if you're not keeping pace with that now, you could potentially have a massive increase in your 2025 budgets. Again, that bill is new. We do expect some changes to that bill, and certainly there's no telling what the legislature will do when it gets in session. But that's the reality that we're dealing with right now. So if you do try to kick the can down the road, and then you're forced to get this updated reserve study per that statute, and then you're forced to fully fund, budgets could go up 50% or more in certain associations.
Right. So Evan, somebody asked the question, should reserves be bumped by 6 to 10% per year to end of life? I know we were just talking about an example yesterday where a roofing project over the last 7-8 months has doubled in price. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not something close to that. There were a few other mitigating factors in that quote, but yes, I mean, I would say just that roofing portion is probably up 50 to 70%.
Right. So just being, again, like Evan said earlier, on the budget, you can't look at them and make overall assumptions about increases. You can't do this. You can't do it with reserve studies either. You need to go each one, because some of these material costs have gone up just incredibly.
Yep. So again, if you are interested in seeing our presentation on the condo inspection bill, it's a very dense bill. It's 88 pages. We did have an attorney guest with us and an insurance expert. I encourage you to go, again, campbellevents.org. That's campbellevents.org, and you will find the condo inspection webinar there.
All right, so Evan, we've said this a few times now. This is like the biggest inflation we've had since the 1980s when you and I weren't doing budgets. So this is not like your normal look through your contracts, figure out we're not doing 2 to 3% per year. How do you budget in an environment like this?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to take some outside the box thinking. It's going to take more work than it has in prior years. I would say first thing you got to do is you got to look at your current performance, and you have to base increases for your non-contractual categories off your current year actuals and trends. You can't just go by last year's budget. I see some people say, okay, we'll just go up 3% from the budget last year. You could be way over budget of what you thought you'd be a year ago because of all this inflation, and you have to figure out why and figure out if that's going to persist going into 2023. Last year's budget could be very wrong. So understand your trends in 2022. And remember, we still have 6 months to go to 9.6% inflation. That means costs are going up almost 1% a month, 0.8% a month, something like that. That's really significant. So if you're basing your budget off what things cost today in July of 2022, and we're doing a 2023 budget, we could experience 4 or 5 more % inflation coming to the end of the year here. So factor in, you may need to overestimate a little bit because we're doing this pretty far in advance. You got to look at your existing contracts now, understand when they expire and what the cancellation clauses might be. Like I said, you may get canceled by a vendor if you have a price that's relatively low and they have a way out. because they may need the labor elsewhere, or they may not be able to make money at your account anymore. And again, they're just not going to lose money doing this. Talk to your insurance agents. And some of these condos that I'm sure are on the call today, that may be the largest single item in their budget. I would wait, if you're a January 1 insurance renewal, I would consider waiting as long as possible to pass your 2023 budget until you have a firm figure, because I saw several associations this year pass budgets because they had been able to every other year in October, maybe early November. Then the insurance quote comes in end of November, early December, and they're already in the hole and talking about a special assessment before they've even started the 2023 budget. I saw someone ask already on the call, does it make sense to inflate the dues significantly, or should you try to use special assessments to cover these costs? I just don't see how you can use special assessments, and I don't really understand what the point of that would even be. You're adding a ton of work and collections issues potentially, to your accounting, and then you're not giving people a clear picture of what it's going to cost. And then what do you do the next year? Do you do even more special assessments? How many special assessments do you do this year? I think we've never done that in any prior year. And to start doing it now just because of inflation just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think you just have to be realistic with yourself as to what's going to happen to these costs. So again, look at your contracts, talk to your vendors, try to get their expectations for next year. And again, be realistic. Trying to force a vendor to stay with a bad contract is probably not going to work out for you in the long run. You might get a few more months out of it, but that vendor is likely looking to see how they can exit that contract and make money elsewhere.
So have you actually seen vendors canceling in this environment, Evan?
I have. I've seen landscapers cancel many times recently, and access control vendors as well. They're just not. They can't afford to be in these contracts. And with scarce labor, there are other associations or other customers that are willing to pay, and they're taking that scarce labor force that's available to them right now and relocating it to properties or other customers that are paying a market rate. So, access control is the same way. If in places that are locked into an older contract on access control and the vendor's kind of forced to perform, we're hearing a lot of complaints about just a revolving door of staff, unqualified staff, and it's an issue. So if you're close to contract renewal, get a bid now. Don't try to get hung up on the lowest cost provider. Again, security or access control, try to find out what they're paying the individual, not what they're charging you. That'll tell you if it's a fair market rate. And if you have a vendor that's performing well and all they're asking for is more money for their staff, you really need to hear them out, because they're telling you the truth.
Right. And then what about, people are always looking for opportunities for savings. Are there any savings that associations, categories they might want to consider?
I have seen one category recently that several associations have had success with, and people are more open to it now because of inflation, and that's the virtual guard options. Communities, especially communities with multiple gates or condos with certain access control features, have been able to take advantage of virtual guards or fob systems and call boxes and different things, and saving some of the cost of having that person physically sit there 24 hours a day. That can result in some really significant savings. I've heard 70,000, I've heard 90,000, I've heard 100,000, depending on your access control situation. So that's maybe the biggest area I'm hearing about. I have heard some people talk about cutting some services, but it's not, it's risky. Remember, home values are up down here 30-40% over the last few years. And people who are paying $1 million for a home here in South Florida have very different expectations than someone who may have been paying $500,000 or $600,000 for a home. So you've got to keep that in mind. Expectations are much higher now, and newer buyers, seem to be able to afford, more expensive dues, more expensive homes. And if you're going to be a neighborhood of $1 million homes, cutting the landscaping down to fewer cuts or fewer bed services is probably not going to be good for your values, and it's probably not going to save you a lot of money because costs are up so much anyway. So a little bit more about the budget process for 23 is up here next.
Yeah, so what should the associations be doing now? I mean, what actions can they take to try to get ahead of this?
Yeah, I recommend you really start to look at your numbers now, see where you're at through 6 months, through 7 months. Should be getting your July financials in the next 4 weeks or so. So start talking amongst your board, your finance committee, if you have one, what you're seeing and what your expectations are. Maybe do an early preliminary budget to see where you think you might end up. Again, start talking to some vendors now. And getting a feel for expiring contracts, what's happening with those contracts you're in, but maybe underpriced. What could you expect for those? So that way you have, some more concrete figures to talk about. But I recommend you start talking to your owners earlier than ever. The only thing worse than a big increase in the dues is a surprise big increase in the dues. So I think if you start talking about it at board meetings, informing owners, perhaps hold a town hall earlier than you may have otherwise to talk about your budget and what you're seeing, that the price increases are somewhat inevitable based on, what everything we're seeing. So as long as people can prepare for that and understand why, I think that's going to make a big difference. Use your newsletter. If you have one, any other communication tools you have. Don't necessarily be the bearer of bad news all the time. If your insurance has gone up 30, 40, 100%, bring in your insurance agent. They earn a very substantial commission to write those policies. They should be more than happy to come to your association and explain why, the budget has to go up as much as it does and what's happened in the market that's forcing that. They'll talk about what other insurance companies that they've been to, what other companies quoted, and give people in the crowd a comfort level that, the association and the agent has done their due diligence. They've been to the market, and this really is the best deal that you can get, and why.
Great. So what about associations concerned about rising costs for the residents?
I mean, this is always a tough one, right? I mean, we want to try to be sensitive. We know some people are on fixed incomes. We know, if we do enter a recessionary period here, some people may lose their jobs, and it's an unfortunate situation. But we also have to keep in mind, what is the board's responsibility? The board does not have a responsibility to make sure all owners can pay. That they have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain the association for the benefit of all the owners and maintain all the property values. There's nothing in the bylaws that says the board's duty is to try to keep dues as low as possible or make sure there's zero delinquency. Certainly you have to strike a balance, but at the same time, you have to be realistic about what things cost today and what they're going to cost over the next 18 months. One figure I didn't post here, but I read recently is they're anticipating Social Security may go up as much as 10.3%. Anyone who knows anything about Social Security knows they're typically very conservative when it comes to Social Security inflation. It's often the number they quote for Social Security to go up is typically less than what people will tell you they experience in terms of real inflation. So if that's going up 10.3%, we have some real problems in the economy. And on the flip side, it's somewhat good news in the sense that those people who were on fixed incomes are getting enough of a bump that if your association dues are going up 8 to 10%, that at least those fixed income people should hopefully be able to keep up. But I know this isn't a great message. I know it's not something everyone wants to hear, but there really just is not a magic bullet here. This is a reality that we're dealing with as a country right now.
So Evan, a lot of people want to know if there's a limit or cap on how much dues can increase.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I'll say, misunderstanding about the law in this area. I'm not an attorney. I don't want to get into it in a ton of depth, but I'll just say this. The law says that, it doesn't say that a budget for a condo can't go up more than 15%. I think that's the misunderstanding. The budget in a condo can go up whatever it needs to go up. If it were to go up more than 15%, there is a provision in the law for members to petition the board, and I forget the exact number of members that have to sign a petition, but there is a process they can go through. They can petition the board, and then someone from that group of members, because it's probably not going to be the board, has to create an alternative budget, and then that budget actually requires a vote of owners. So it's a really high threshold. If and when someone wants to challenge an increase in your condominium of 15% or more. So it is not a hard cap. There is no similar portion of the HOA statute that talks about a 15% cap on dues and petitioning the board. So again, just to recap, there is no law that says the budget can't go up more than 15%. It's just a process for what you may be able to do if it does, and that's only on the condo side. There are some association documents I've seen that do cap increases on association dues. That's a little bit trickier. Those tend to be hard caps from what I've seen. They do not tend to be related to a petition or a vote. Again, not an attorney. If you are in that situation and you're seeing that you really have no choice but to go up more than an increased number in your documents, you need to get in touch with your attorney as soon as you see that situation arising. I'll just say anecdotally, I have heard a couple of attorneys say, the fiduciary duty to maintain your association comes before a duty to keep in line with the documents potentially. But that's going to be fact specific, document specific. So that's, you're going to have to talk to your counsel when you get in that situation. And certainly you're going to want to get an opinion from them if you're going to exceed some cap that exists in your documents.
Great.
When you do go to inform your owners of all this, try not to talk in broad generalities about how much the dues are going up in inflation. Try to talk about specifics, figure out what are the biggest contracts or line items that you have, and speak specifically about those. Have the insurance agent explain insurance, maybe have the landscaper explain landscaping, have your property management company speak to you about property management services. Be specific as to why these categories are going up. I think if you do look at your budget, you'll find half or more, sometimes 70%, depending on which budgets I'm looking at, can be boiled down into 4 or 5 line items. And then the rest of it, what you may consider somewhat discretionary or more discretionary spending, amounts to very little of the budget. So just, one more thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Evan, I would just add the most important word on this whole slide is the first one that's in all caps, which is now.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to get this out there, even if it's just a preliminary kind of warning that this is coming. I think about this as like the stages of grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's going to be upset. You're going to have denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So the earlier you get to that, the sooner you can get to that acceptance and bargaining and acceptance process. So this is absolutely something you want to get out there. And even if you don't have all the details worked out, just give them a warning that this is coming so they can start absorbing it and start getting themselves prepared for it.
Right. All right. I think that takes us to the end here. There is some good Q&A. I'll leave up our contact information in case you have any questions for us directly. Mine and Dan's email addresses are on there. So let me get into this a little bit and see how we can help. So Ira asks, does the requirement to fully fund reserves only affect properties buildings 3 stories or more? Or is a property that's not higher than 2 stories able to waive reserves? So Ira, that is something that we did get into with the attorney on our prior call. It is actually unclear right now how that's going to be interpreted. I have actually heard 2 different attorneys very staunchly take both sides of that argument already. So I have to caution it's too early to tell. As far as we know, the legislature is aware of the lack of clarity on some of these items, and we do expect at their next session that there's going to be what they call a glitch bill or a correction bill and clarify some of those things. So I do wish I had a better answer for you, but we don't at this time. And again, if you did want to watch that webinar, it's on campbellevents.org. Don't quite understand that question there. Is there any room for adjusting terms on item components and straight line estimates to make it more reasonable for the owners? I think you can't look at when you're doing the budget, it's not about making it reasonable for the owners, it's making it accurate. And if you can push out, I think what you're referencing is, if the existing life on a component is a little bit longer and we can push it out on the reserve schedule, therefore we may have a little bit more time to collect for it, which in turn reduces the amount you have to collect each year. That could be reasonable if it's reality, but you don't do it just to make it better for the owners. You have to do it because that's real life. Because remember, you do by law have to create a accurate reserve schedule to the best of your knowledge. Who does the reserve study? There are lots of reserve study specialists out there, companies that do it. If you're talking about the new reserve study that is related to the condo inspection bill, that's a structural integrity reserve study, they're calling it. That's at least a component of it going to have to be done by engineers. I would assume that these reserve study companies that have been doing this in our industry for the last 10 to 15 years will probably start to partner with some engineers, or vice versa. Some engineering firms will start to partner with them. So if you're looking at that type of study, it's probably a little early to get a structural integrity reserve study. But if you're looking for the standard one, if you look up Florida reserve study or Florida reserve study companies in Google, I'm sure you'll find some. I'd love to recommend them, but I really can't on this call today. If you are our customer, client of Campbell, just go ahead and email me and I can get you some recommendations. Let's see here. So this is a good question. Someone asks, the association's running in the red in 2022. We have insurance increases, other cost increases. Can we adopt a revised budget in 22 and pass a special assessment for the fourth quarter? So the law does give you the ability to pass a revised budget at any time. That's different from a special assessment, though. You're changing the budget, and then you're going to issue, new payment amounts for however many months remaining based on that revised budget. And I have seen a few associations do that. I would recommend, though, if being this close to the end of the year, if you think you're going to run out of cash, I would recommend a one-time special assessment. Make it payable in full. You don't want people paying over time because they're going to be paying for their 2022 dues effectively in 2023 if you stretch that out too far. But being we're already 7 months through the year, I would probably just try to do one assessment, replace the cash that maybe got spent on insurance, and just budget better for 2023. But again, everyone's situation's going to be unique. Andrew says, we recently did a study in Q1 22. That number is 5 times more than our current reserve account values. Some of those items appear to be inflated. I have some bad news, Andrew. I think it's probably more likely that your current reserve account values weren't rarely reflective of actuals, rather than your reserve study company is grossly overinflating values. They do this every day. They have a pretty good handle on costs. I don't know your personal situation. I don't know who did the prior accounting for it, but if it hadn't been updated in a while, it's possible that 5 times seems a lot, but it's certainly possible that a lot of those categories were under budgeted. Someone asks, our landscaping vendors ask for fuel charge. It's becoming common. The short answer is yes. We are seeing fuel surcharges, not just requested by landscapers, but really anybody who has a service that's delivery or using a lot of equipment. And if you think of a landscaper, again, they have to drive to your property, they have to drive around your property, they have to put gas in the mowers and the weed whackers and the edgers. They're using gas all day, and so no one wants to hear it, but the reality is, with gas up 50% and that being a huge component of what they do, it makes sense. And you're not alone.
Evan, I'll go back to one. Jeff asked if the association will likely be running in the red in 22, mostly due to insurance increase in repair labor costs. Can we adopt a revised budget in September and pass a special assessment in Q4. So
Yeah.
what I would say to that would be, you can do a special assessment if you're not going to have enough money to pay your operating bills this year, but I would not try to do a revised budget. You don't need to do that. You'll just be grossly over and you're going to fund it via special assessment. So that would be the way you would do that. And I think that's something we talked about, in some other webinars as well.
Right. We have a brand new roof that won't be replaced for 30 years. Why would owners want to be reserving on items that won't be replaced in their lifetime? Yeah, I mean, this is the classic argument that people would get into, whether we should reserve, not reserve, waive reserves. Unfortunately, John, it looks like the legislature is going to take the ability to waive reserves and the even ability to have that argument away from associations. They already have, it looks like, and if that doesn't change, it's going to be a moot point whether or not you should. I could get into both sides of that argument academically. I don't think it's kind of outside the purview of the call today. The flip side of that would be that while you're living there, you are utilizing a portion of that, of that facility, of that roof. So every year that you're there, you're getting the benefit of that new roof. You should be paying something towards that. That's one argument. The other argument is a safety argument. If everyone doesn't want to fund the reserves, then all of a sudden you get into a Surfside situation where people knew what needed to be done, but no one politically, it seemed, was able to get the money spent because the price tag had gotten so big. So multiple boards appear to have kicked the can down the road because politically it was just so untenable to spend that amount of money. And then we all know what happened at Surfside. Obviously, there are other factors as well, but that's a main one that the legislature considered when they said you don't have the ability to waive reserves anymore. At some point, the price tag becomes too great, and then it becomes a safety hazard. So Hope brings up this 15%. She said, since we're required to obtain approval from the members of the community when your budget's over 15%, will this rule change? I tried to cover that a little bit earlier, Hope. I may have not been clear enough. The statute does not say that you need to get approval for the owners if your budget's over 15% increased. It says the owners have a right to petition the board, and at that point, an alternative budget can be presented, and the owners have to vote on the alternative budget. It's a fairly complex process. You can speak to your attorney if you have additional questions, or go through the statute in 718 and find it in there. It does spell out very clearly what process you would have to go through, but the board does not have to worry that if they go up 15% or more, they're getting a vote. You are not forced to get a vote.
Unless it's in the docs, like you mentioned earlier, it could be in the docs. Yeah. And if that's the case, then you may end up just having to bump it up to 15% and then put a special assessment in place because you have to pay the bills.
Right. And again, when you're in that situation, I highly recommend getting legal advice, because that is a much more different situation than the 15% cap in statute. So is there cost savings by doing lawn care with in-house employees rather than landscape companies? I would say no. I don't think you're going to save money with in-house lawn care. First, you have to buy all that equipment. Second, you have some serious liability issues to consider from a workers' comp standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, from a pest control standpoint, and then from an efficiency standpoint, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be anywhere near as efficient as a professional landscaping firm. And then, do you have the expertise to manage something like that? There's so many factors that go into it. I've almost never seen it done in-house, and when I have, I've seen some really, I'll say, scary things. So I would try to avoid that. Elevator modernization. Are we aware of any variance on the compliance date for elevator modernization? Dan, you know a little bit about that. Are you familiar with?
Yeah, the door lock monitoring, kind of came out at the beginning of this year. They gave a couple of years to make it happen. It doesn't, if your elevators are put in post like 1998, 99, definitely 2000, it's not an issue for you. And but if it is an issue, it is thousands of dollars. But when you think about what it's for, I don't foresee them kicking this down the road because there's just not enough. A fairly small percentage of condos are going to have to face it. And the whole concept they're trying to prevent door lock monitoring is if someone puts their arm in, that the door will monitor that it shouldn't go up and rip your arm off or limb off. That's the point of it. So it's a very straightforward safety concern. And again, I don't think it's not like ELSS, which was impacting a huge percentage of condos. It's hitting a much smaller percentage. So I don't foresee, with everything else that's going on right now, I don't foresee this thing getting kicked down the road.
Yeah. Somebody asked what's the average percentage of home value that should go to maintenance fees. There really isn't a number. It's so much of it is based on amenities, right? What services is your association providing? If they're providing you with, in a condo, perhaps cable TV, insurance, water, all those sort of things, it's going to be a much higher percentage than if all they're doing is keeping a monument sign at your front entrance to your HOA nice. So it really runs the gamut. You may have, some places have restaurants within their association. Some places have resort pools, massive clubhouses, events. I mean, it's really association dependent, and people are willing to pay more for certain amenities that are valuable to them. So can we share this?
So one of the questions is, says, can property management companies do reserve studies? You don't want us to. We don't want to. There's too much variability and too much going on in the market to be playing around with this. You really need to get a professional that's keeping track of everything at a super detailed level, because you can't rely on past experience anymore on this, because there's just so much change.
Yeah, and they're really not that expensive at the end of the day. So Joe asks, hello Joe, should we share this webinar with the residents to fully understand the situation? Links to this webinar will be posted. It'll be posted on YouTube. It's certainly public, and you're welcome to share it with whomever you think needs to hear it. Just don't shoot the messenger. So
I think we're past our finish time, Evan.
Okay.
12:45. So.
Well, at this point, we try to get to as many people as we could. Really appreciate those of you who jumped on today. I wish we had better news for everybody, but sometimes you just have to play the hand that you're dealt, and we have to be realistic. Sticking our head in the sand, pretending like dues aren't going to go up or it's going to be another modest increase this year, it's just not reality, and we have to take care of our facilities. So, for those of you that are Campbell clients on the call, we'll be working closely with you. If you need property management services or feel like you've been underserved in terms of budgeting or understanding reserves or anything like that and need to reach out, please email Dan or myself, and we can start a conversation. And look forward to our future webinars. Again, campbellevents.org. That's where you can go and see what events we have upcoming. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and any upcoming events will be sent to you, and you can register, and we enjoy having you all on. Dan, anything else today?
Yeah, just one other thing is, we also have a blog called Florida Association News. It's on our website. You can find it there, or you can go to FAN, Florida Association News.org, readfan.org. And there's a whole series of articles in there specifically about inflation. We're doing a series once a month and talking about the impact of inflation on community associations. So those might be good things to share with your owners as well, and just give you some other basis for what we're talking about with regard to these increases.
All right. Thank you very much. Everybody have a great afternoon. Bye now.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.